All right, we're good.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the final day of the principal seminar. This one will be on liberty, and then in the second hour, we'll have anonymous chat in status. So liberty, it's our first principle. We believe in the sovereignty of individuals. As a platform that stands for the cause of personal liberty, we aim to maximize social, political, and economic freedoms. And this includes being cursor resistant. So I have a presentation, but we'll do as we did the last few sessions and start with sort of brainstorm generation for Wall of Shame. So I guess, who wants to go? Ned, maybe, do you want to go first?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Sure. I guess probably the first thing that comes to mind for me specifically around liberty is ensuring people have the right tools based on their skill sets and cultures to be able to say what they want or build what they want. So I think that it's important to honor, you know, where people are at culturally in the world, what the conditions are like, what resources they have, and find a kind of balance between those things that would give us a good understanding of how to really scale, you know, the tools really scalable so everybody could use them.
Okay, so the wall of shame is kind of like a thing of how we're failing or things that we're not doing based on that principle, rather than sort of like a statement about.
Okay, so maybe it's better to say it's probably.
How do you feel that we fail at that?
I think that we haven't really taken into account all different cultural perspectives in shaping those tools. For example, you know, how often do we test in Iraq or Iran or Mogadishu or, you know, Gaza, or like, is it helpful if, you know, it's possible to switch the interface on the other side for, I don't know, China or something, you know, like considering different perspectives in that way. They were to have their own builds, let's say. Yeah.
Awesome. Actually.
Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to studio, for example, one of the features we want to have down the line is that people should be able to choose, a developer should be able to choose from across various frameworks to develop on. So for example, Embark, but also Truffle, et cetera. And so we kind of want it to be a non-partisan platform and give people as much liberty as possible in terms of what tools they want to use to develop. I don't know if this is a wall of shame, but it's kind of aspirational to sort of not get on the wall of shame.
Cool. Barry?
This is actually a hard one because I don't know, I think we're pretty good actually with this principle. Like in general, I mean, I guess a violation of this principle is if somehow we allowed like an oppressive group or regime to somehow use status to compromise on the liberty of individuals. But I don't think that's happened, and I don't think there's well, you know, I mean, maybe possibly that security incident the other day could somehow, you know, be an indicator of something that could have happened, that could have allowed someone's property or to be stolen, which I guess, you know, might be able to fall under that. But yeah, that's really all for me on this, on liberty, I guess.
Cool. Ben?
Sorry, that was an accident. I just joined.
Oh no. Do you have something if you want to say something, wall of shame for liberty.
Not at the moment. Not at the moment.
Okay, cool. Chad?
Yeah, so it's one thing to have the principle, but we don't really have mechanisms to make sure that it's being carried out. Like, how do we even know that we're maximizing social, political, and economic freedoms? We specifically mentioned being coercion resistance, but I don't know if we've actually tested that. When I know Jacek has mentioned a few times that status doesn't work in like airport Wi-Fi's. So there's a lot we can do to actually validate these things and actually make sure we are living the principle of liberty, not just saying it.
Cool. Gloomy?
Yeah. So I think the lack of open protocol that we are, of course, started to working on, but right now the protocol is hidden inside our application. That means that there can be an ecosystem of applications that use our protocol to do something bigger. So that's what comes to mind.
Cool. Graham?
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add. I think in terms of being a tool for libertarianism, it's pretty open. Anyone can use the tool. Yeah, if anything, maybe perhaps there's, I guess, the need for, not right now anyway, but the need for instructions to use the status network protocol outside of the status app.
Cool. JP?
Yeah, so I think in terms of economic freedoms, our big failing is that crypto or status is still very, very technically complex from the average user's point of view. And I think it's actually more difficult, like at this point, it's more difficult to use crypto than to not. So we're not providing that economic freedom to people.
Yep. Cool. Maria? All right. Ned already spoke. Rachel?
So we didn't actually launch this, but just thinking in terms of being an open system versus one that tries to control and impose certain things when people are participating. With ENS, we initially had built the ENS resolution chat such that only stateofus.eth addresses would be resolved properly. And that's no longer the case. We fixed that, so now any .eth domain will resolve. And I think that's just important to make sure that we're not trying to manipulate users into behaving in a way that we want them to, or encourage them to use our S&T back feature.
Cool, awesome. Sean?
Sorry, I came a little bit late to this, so I'll agree with a lot of what's been shared at this point, or I have no comment at this point. Just joined.
Cool.
Sorry, guys.
Okay, sure, no worries. Ricardo?
Well, about the liberty, I think maybe plausible deniability we should have, I think.
Do you mean in terms of like using status, or in terms of messages, or?
In general, yeah, in general, because we don't have this deniability. Yep. And I think some places you will be only free to use status if we have this.
Cool. Sonia? All right. Carrie?
So I don't know if this one counts, but I'm thinking about liberty. I'm actually kind of looking inwards at the liberty of core contributors. And I wonder if it's a failing that because we kind of still on this like classic employee kind of model, that like that economic liberty may not be there in as much as that like when we move towards a DAO, there'll be more opportunities to contribute in like a flexible way that provides more freedom to the individual. But right now you're kind of like on a monthly retainer in some ways to status, and that feels like something that hasn't yet gone as far as we can do in terms of that liberty of the individual contributor.
Cool. Corey?
Graham and Igor stole mine.
Okay, awesome. Exile Surfer?
Carrie and Graham stole mine.
All right, cool. Moot, you don't get to speak right now. You get to speak the next hour, 45 minutes. I just want to add this one, which is a tweet that Vitalik sent out December, like a year ago. And it's essentially summed up by, as a community, as a crypto community, it's touched upon a bit ahead before, that we haven't delivered on sort of our promises of increasing personal liberty, enabling economic freedom, let alone at any form of scale.
Post that link in the chat, please.
It's right in the notes, so you can just go to notes which are posted in the chat. Yeah. And it's things like the fact that we haven't unbanked, we don't have any specific instance of unbanking people. How much actually censorship resistant have we? Do we have any examples of that at all? And so on. And we just haven't, we barely have any success stories, let alone any form of scale in terms of doing this for lots of people. Cool. And if you want to add stuff, just go ahead and add it in this document. With that, I'll move over to the presentation. So sovereignty of individuals, self-sovereignty of individuals. So this is a book by John Stuart Mill called On Liberty. It was written maybe 150 years ago or something. And it's kind of important in terms of how we think about liberty today as a concept, I would say. And sort of it's a very simple, it's much more eloquent than I am now, but it's sort of a very simple thesis or principle. And it's this idea of the self-sovereignty of individual. And it's sort of set in this context of individuality versus some form of authority and sort of tensions between that. And really what he's sort of arguing for is that people should have complete autonomy of sort of their life and their property and everything they do under the condition that they sort of don't harm other people. That's sort of the harm principle. And you can go a lot deeper into this philosophically and so on. In terms of specific freedoms, so we talk about economic freedom, and it might sound abstract, but it's actually kind of concrete. There's some sort of institutions that sort of have very specific metrics for this, and this is one example. And looking at sort of business freedom and monetary freedom and investment and property rights and so on. And in general, it's sort of been going up for quite a while, and it's also fairly correlated in terms of well-being and happiness for people and opportunity and these kinds of things. So you might notice that Hong Kong is number one there, for example. And just because you have economic freedom, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have political freedom. So Hong Kong has been going through a transition period where it was sort of under British rule, partly for a long time. And then it was recently handed over to China. And this is sort of the umbrella protest in 2014, which I'm sure lots of people, many people here have heard about. And essentially it was some regulation that China put in place that led it so that people couldn't sort of stand for elections that sort of were maybe more pro Hong Kong and so on. And that's something that a lot of people didn't like. And I think with both sort of economic freedom, it's kind of obvious that if you have mass adoption of Ethereum, that you can sort of provide for a lot of these things. And maybe if you don't notice it if you're active in the same country you were born and that country happens to be like some Western country or so. But if you sort of come from a different country or you move around or something, you notice these types of problems quite quickly and sort of the ease, how much something like crypto can help in terms of solving these things, especially as it sort of gets more and more integrated with property rights solutions and so on. And the same thing when it comes to things like political freedoms, because really what we're building here, if you think about it and read the white paper and sort of, it's kind of like it's this socioeconomic system, and it's this, it's sort of a form of community-based money and a community-based law that allows people to sort of coordinate with each other and communicate and transact in a sensor-persistent way. And for example, in this protest, there were a lot of people who were coordinating over sort of, there were internet shutdowns, and they were coordinating via this app that sort of didn't require internet, and it was instead via Bluetooth and this type of mesh network. And obviously touches on governance issues and these kinds of things. In terms of social freedoms, this is a sort of picture from the suffrage movement about 100 years ago in Britain. And it's the same kind of thing here, that if we have sort of tools that allow people to socially coordinate and sort of work for these types of things, it can be a platform for that type of thing. And there's a lot of applications that are more modern than this, but it's just like an obvious example. When we talk about coercion resistance, this is XKCD comic about sort of the difference between the imagination of this sort of perfect system and how easy it is to attack, where you just have like the wrench attack and you just threaten someone. And there are ways around this. We're working on it partly with things like automated builds and so on. But the general principle is that if people have been trusting us in terms of being a platform for personal liberty and so on, that we don't want to be vulnerable to just one of us being threatened and that's sort of compromising everyone else. So that's it for sort of the liberty principle. I guess I just want to say, like, yeah, first let's do this. So there's this sort of glib comment by Groucho Marx, these are my principles, and if you don't like them, well, I have others. And sort of what he means by this is that you might have principles, but maybe some people just say their principles and then they sort of compromise on them. And I don't think that's sort of where we want to be, where we have principles on one hand and then we sort of do something else on the other hand. But that said, it's important to remember that these principles are sort of not set in stone. It's more sort of ways of thinking about it and lenses to view things. Like this is sort of the consensus about what we think we're doing. It's important and they're sort of self-cohesive in some way, and it's more sort of pointing to something. And it's important to not get too stuck in terms of the literal interpretation, not be literalist about it. And sort of it's sort of more of a manifestation of the culture and the ideology that sort of status is. Or lack of ideology, depending on how you want to look at it. So with that, we have the Anon chat in 40 minutes, and you can join it. And preferably, if you join it with an anonymous account, you can either use the Moot account that will be provided instructions for later, but you can see it on Discuss as well. Or you can create a new account. And even if you don't want to be sort of anonymous, it's really helpful for the people who want to be anonymous, because the more people are talking anonymously, the sort of easier it is for people to stay anonymous. And here you can sort of talk about anything related to principles, and everyone watching at YouTube, please chime in. This is a great opportunity for the community to have any kind of thoughts about all the principles and wall of shame and so on we talked about over these last 2 weeks. And with that, I just want to say like a huge thanks to everyone who's been helping out, both sort of in terms of arranging these seminars and in participating. We're seeing like, it's been a big time commitment. We're seeing like 2 weeks with 2 hours, 2 hours free hours, 3 times a day, 2 hours each time. And that's like a huge ask, right? Especially before an event like DevCon. And I think we've been around 20 people participating in Zoom and writing this wall of shame, and then lots of people on YouTube. So just huge kudos for everyone who's participating. And yeah, I hope we sort of make use of this and it informs our thinking, and we have better discussions in Prague, and we get some sort of tangible wall of shame out that can sort of inform what we do over the next few months and sort of work to be truer to ourselves. So thank you. And with that, I hand over to Michael for general liberty discussion.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back. This has been an amazing 2 weeks. Like Oscar has said, thanks everybody right up here at the beginning. I'd like to start off right with the first 2 points, actually, because they can be combined. So Studio's vision and Ned's comment about having tools for skill set and culture. I'd like to open up the question in the round. What people think that we can specifically do as action points to combat this lack of liberty that we're providing for people?
One thing that has been interesting is that we've had an influx of Chinese users, and heard from Oscar that they might have come to status because of censorship or political reasons. So we might have actually been promoting liberty, but we might not know the full details. So we kind of have this interesting area to explore, and I think we can do a lot more there to see what we can do to help at least this particular group, among others.
So do people think that we need to have more multilingual users? I would guess yes. And how would we go about getting bilingual collaborators, contributors, ambassadors? Is that part of your thinking, Sean?
Yeah, absolutely. I think right now we do have, like, we do currently have communities, obviously, that are non-English speaking, but I think we can obviously do more. And yeah, I think hopefully
how can we help you? How can we enable more languages to be present?
Be honest,
what are we not doing yet?
To be honest, like Eduardo and Gino actually raised this on a call a few weeks ago about this idea that, like, you know, even from a content perspective, you know, a lot of content that, you know, we have a plethora of content as English speakers. And I think that there's definitely something that we should try more and more actively to create educational content that's enabling for this community that can, you know, educate them on the technology, I can educate them on our values, educate them on just the broader ecosystem. I think that can really do wonders. And I also think that as we start creating content around some of our values, I think that will actually be really powerful as well. So like Iran's another example where we've heard examples from the community where, you know, there's a lot of censorship. You know, Telegram gets shut down before an election in Iran. So there's a lot to do there. So I think enabling through content, and then obviously this advocacy program will play a part in all of it in terms of disseminating the message. But I definitely think education and content will go a long way.
Cool. So let me ask a question. How many languages are we currently supporting on the website?
On the website, I would probably say, I know that we have Korean, Spanish, simplified Chinese. That might be it, unless anyone else knows of any I might be missing.
Well, I think it would be cool if we set an action point to have you know, a basic you know, global perspective on having languages available for all of our basis information. That would include the website. I would say it would be really, really important for people ops, our technical documentation. I think these are things that we should set as action points. How does everybody feel about that? That we set ourselves a deadline to get information, our basic information available in multiple languages. Does that mean nobody agrees or everybody agrees?
Yeah, no, I think it's a good action item to have. And I don't know much about this, but I feel like it's something that we can crowdsource and put in place. So yeah, it feels feasible and it feels like a really noble goal to have. I don't know if anyone on this call knows a lot, maybe like Chad, like how much effort is involved in like translating or localizing certain things.
It's actually been incredibly straightforward and streamlined using this service called Localized. And, you know, community members have come on, they've got this like a really intuitive UI, and they've been able to do that. If we don't have any particular community members, there's also an option to pay for translations as well. We did that for the Google Play Android listing. We did, I don't know, maybe like 9 or 10 languages that way, then had it verified by the community. But if there's like a particular format, like technical format that we can plug into, then it'll make it a lot easier for the website. I'm not sure how we translate the website currently.
Cool. So rather than going deeper into this, maybe we can get a small working group together on the side without an appointment, just sort of spontaneously while we're in Prague, and set ourselves a timeline and an action plan about how it is that we combine what's being built with the ambassador program and using Localized and what PeopleOps is doing. That would be really cool. That we
I'd love to be part of that.
Get some OKRs going about how we actually implement this in a plan, and talk together with marketing as well, and consider, you know, a really good push for this year. Let's move off to this point, and let's talk about a real big elephant in the room. Let's talk about Test Ferry and the ability of property to be stolen, and what it is that we're putting in place, or we plan to put in place, to mitigate that factor. Corey, you want to talk about that a little bit? Okay, Corey's not responding. Is somebody in, Igor, would you possibly something about that?
Yeah. So we will have like tomorrow we'll have a postmortem about this particular issue. So I'm kind of right now there are a little bit of, I don't know if everyone is on the same page, but actually did happen. So I really encourage you to join the postmortem. And there it's actually the sole purpose is to figure out what's exactly went wrong.
I don't think it's a good use of time to talk too much about this specific issue unless there's a larger point that won't be captured in postmortem. It's too deep.
That's what I'm talking about. Yeah, right. There will be a specific meeting tomorrow about this. So if you want,
okay, cool.
You can join.
Cool. So then let's spend some time then talking about the lack of an open protocol and what we can do about that. Let's combine that with the instructions on how to use the status network protocol outside of the status app. What are the thoughts there, people? And I want to talk specific action items as well.
Can you
explain? Yeah, again, we started the working group. Oh, sorry.
No, I just wanted if you could explain protocol. Like, what do you mean? Can you explain?
Yeah, essentially, like we have a Whisper as a baseline, and then we have some code in our Clojure code base that uses this Whisper in a specific way to make chat rooms and messages and things like that. But this isn't really this isn't really a protocol, like an open protocol. It's not like you can go somewhere and read a full specification of that and make your own implementation of that, not in Clojure, but like in JavaScript or in Lua or in whatever language you want. So that means that we have this knowledge and it's hidden, and essentially the whole that's why it's hard to access like our chat rooms. That's why the apps, for instance, we can't provide an easy API for the apps to send something to our chat rooms and things like that. So it's closed. It's a lot of possibilities. So essentially, it's close to our desktop and mobile clients right now. In this way, we are a little bit better than like WhatsApp, for instance, in that case, but it's still we are far away from that.
We specifically have a working group. Is there a timeline and an idea of deliverables? What is the timeline on that?
Can we not?
I don't know.
I would not focus too much on these types of specific, because it's like, yeah, it's a big effort, and we're going to talk about it in Prague. It's no, yeah.
Okay, good. That's good enough answer. Cool. All right.
What about the sort of more cultural aspects in terms of?
Yeah, I was going to move to that just now.
So in terms of actually, okay, cool.
Go ahead and say something, Austin. Don't want to cut you off.
No, I think Ned brought up a really good point, and I think it was like, in terms of, let's say, unbanking banking the unbanked, or whatever, however you want to call it. We have this sort of use case of status telenetwork and so on, and like we're sitting here with our amazing Wi-Fi and MacBooks and whatever, right? But like people who might not have that, how do we sort of reach them and actually provide real utility for them? I think that's a big question, and it doesn't just like how do we even get there? And I think that touches on what Ned was talking about.
If I could go into more detail, which would I think with things could be interesting. I mean, I think if we have connections with a lot of these communities through Incubate to go there, I think it's interesting for us to go there with tools that we have and see how they use tools and see what comes together. Like, and I think not even in terms of software, I think also in hardware. I think because if you don't have a connection in a lot of these places or in the most harshest environments, it'd be interesting to go there with a small mesh network idea or a light client that can work on a mesh network and really see also what kind of devices are being used, and also like what would be important in the user interface for those people. Like, you know, I think everybody has so many different reasons why to use the product based on what kind of narrative they have in their life, that until we really go into some of these places and find this audience that we're looking for, like it would be probably really helpful, rather than just projecting what we think, than to really get on the ground and be like, test the shit for ourselves in terms of, you know, like, okay, there is no, the Wi-Fi here is low, or these people all use iPhone 5s, or, you know, I think it would be really putting it in practice, testing on the ground.
Okay, cool. Any more thoughts on unbanking the banked and what we can do to do that?
I have another comment that we were loosely chatting around, which might be an idea. I think we mentioned it, Oscar, around like, and maybe instead of next time of having a hackathon, we create a crypto flea market, right? That we could maybe begin and try to apply somewhere in a real case study after that, where we, you know, test with ourselves real goods in an environment and see how we would just interact with one another selling fruit, or, you know, like common things that we understand that aren't digital assets. It's like, and see what learnings come from that. And then maybe we could take that into more of a real market situation that's like a camp or something, where we would have answers that would help inform and make trading or something simpler.
I just posted a link to the chat. I love what this company did. It's a blockchain company. They went to Kenya. They're based in Silicon Valley and Berlin. And they actually flew the team into Kenya, did field notes, sat down and figured out mobile money. There's a really interesting case study and team prep to read in that post, but I would love to see us do something like this.
Yeah, one more thing is that probably might be a good addition to, like, if we're talking Kenya especially, like a lot of rural areas have no network whatsoever, like no internet of any kind. So we can also try to do something like as a hackathon thing. So just to make our application, like, or at least if we're talking unbanked, so to make our wallet work without any, like on both sides, as a someone who buys goods and someone who sells goods. So it should work like without any internet connection, at least from the buyer's perspective, because I think that those who sell stuff there, they still have something, but yeah, but usually there are huge areas that have no mobile internet, no like normal internet, like nothing.
On a similar note, Barry, you had some interesting ideas. This is slightly maybe maybe slightly different because it's more about sort of people in the crypto space and so on, but in terms of what you imagine status could be in sort of the crypto world when it comes to all this infrastructure you need, financial and so on. Do you want to talk briefly? Do you know what I'm talking about? Do you want to mention it briefly?
Yeah, I guess it could be more, I guess it could partially be applied to this principle, but yeah, I guess if you're referring to what I meant is like the status protocol itself being a coordination protocol for other protocols, like or other things. Like for example, today, one thing that works really good in status is to be the way you could just send tokens or ether in a conversation, and it seems like that same sort of UX can be applied to coordination in multi-sig transactions or coordination in voting. But really coordination, if you think about any kind of operations-based activity that happens in centralized organizations that are going to have to be built for decentralized organizations, you could see it playing a role in coordinating those kind of functions and protocols. And we're not the only organization trying to become a DAO. So in theory, this is something that could be valuable for all these other organizations that are trying to become DAOs, and they could be using status to coordinate these different protocols they're building as well.
I just posted into the chat as well a link about a guy who was doing Bitcoin transactions using Samurai Wallet via radio in his local area. It's a very, very interesting thread. Maybe we can do something like this as well. Do some tests with how it is that we can use status over radio waves, and not even over mesh networks or internet or whatever. It just requires one internet connection. But it's a very interesting thread. I suggest people take a look.
Yeah, the difference with radio and mesh network is that the mesh network replicates the message to extend the range. So, but they both can use radio.
Just going back briefly to Barry's today, what I like about that, the way I see it in terms of us reaching mass adoption is essentially two paths. One is sort of centered around sort of the crypto community, with us being sort of the guinea pigs, and the other is maybe on more sort of markets that need censorship resistant tools and these sort of more exposed areas and so on. But talking about this sort of crypto space, we're obviously sort of dogfooting now. We could imagine onboarding the entire crypto community, and there are like a lot of like, I think people see this now already, or people have some visceral understanding of this when it comes to getting sort of your salary in crypto and dealing with banks. And maybe you have like a company that you invoice from, and then like having a separate wallet for that and dealing with that and taxes and all these things, which are sort of blockers for a lot of economic freedom points. If you sort of look at that index, for example, and we can make like an amazing experience there. And it's kind of clear because we are making something for ourselves, and we know people that we're making it for in the larger crypto community. So I think that's a really interesting opportunity, and we don't have that yet. Especially this thing with social and the sort of actual ways of transferring value and all these coordination mechanisms that's going to be needed for any organization over the next coming decades, not just DAOs or whatever magical thing. Like, this is like needed. If you do any kind of multinational business, this is going to happen, and like property rights and stuff. Like, so why not be us?
Actually, this is sort of a question, I guess. Like, you know, one of the things that this, having these coordination tools and having more and more data move to a universally shared ledger, the blockchain, between organizations enables is reducing, I guess, these commerce frictions that are not necessarily like. So I don't think it's like when you talk about economic freedom, like someone is actively trying to oppress it, but they're just like natural frictions that exist today. Like, I think, like, for example, between large organizations, multinational corporations, and small businesses around the world, like, just coordinating, I guess, this what's called the supply chain between each other is just like very complex because they all have these closed siloed databases. And
that's the area that Ethereum is approaching.
I think they literally spend, if you look at the numbers, like hundreds of $1 billions a year on these coordination issues. And I don't know, like if this solves a good chunk of that, and I mean, really, who's going to be making that money? Just like businesses and large enterprises, or will that enable a new group of small individuals to start, small businesses to start entering these markets and enable economic freedom that just is hard to accomplish naturally today, just because I guess like really the technology to coordinate all this really hasn't been deployed.
I just want to point out this essay, which I highly recommend people reading. This is written by Nick Szabo, who's super influential. He termed even the term like smart contracts on 93 about sort of multinational small businesses and so where we're heading in terms of legal and language and all these kinds of costs that Barry's talking about. And it touches on sort of the language issues, but also the sort of interaction with legal frameworks and so on. And yeah, there's a lot to unpack here, I think.
I guess
that's a great essay, and the ebook that I posted as well, The Sovereign Individual, in the links channel. That's also from 90 something. That pretty much predicts where it is that we're at with all of these friction points.
I guess the only thing is, and also what I described, it's like maybe something that'll happen eventually, but it definitely seems like it's outside the core focus of status right now. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem like I guess there's some people working on it in general, like in the space, but probably not nearly enough, like many things. But even if that sort of friction is removed, I guess maybe something that comes back to more of our focus is, will those costs get passed down to the individual or the end consumer, or those cost savings, right? Like if large corporations are saving hundreds of billions of dollars a year, is that going to reduce costs for the end users? And maybe that there's a role in like to play for in helping organizations be transparent, not just ourselves but other ones, to it'd be
I'm curious what this.
I would just say it'd be a shame if like literally there was this like hundreds of billions of dollars in economic value that's unlocked, and it just really gets distributed to a couple of already wealthy people.
I'm curious what Sonja's view is on this general sort of space and sort of coming from a different angle and level of expertise. What are your thoughts in this regarding this? If you're here. All right. Maybe Ben.
Hey, hello.
Oh, sorry. Hello.
I'm here. Well, I think I could say a lot of things, but I don't know where to start from. So to target certain communities, which are definitely not technically equipped, it's much harder. And it definitely demands resources and some kind of strategy how to approach them, to intrigue them, and somehow to create some kind of use case that will actually change their lives. Because we can show them application and what we are building, but if it doesn't reflect in their day-to-day activities, they will never use it. And as someone was talking about, exactly what we should do. It's not just flying once to Kenya to promote yourself in this direction. It's actually to put together, like, we all are remote and we are living in different countries. And maybe we can find some kind of examples of what could be like good solution. Well, like what kind of groupation to make some kind of pilot testing. Like for instance, in BitNation, I know that we had some certain groupations of homeless people. Even though they're homeless, they all have phones and somehow they're using them. So how to incentivize them to start using to be introduced with tokens. And I think it's really ambitious topic, and definitely needs a lot of people to be included and to work on this. And I don't know, you point me for certain for certain question regarding legal frameworks about what? I didn't understand the question you're pointing at.
So in terms of discussion that Barry brought up with sort of, as we're moving to sort of a DAO, we need sort of these coordination mechanisms, whether it's for as alternatives to bank accounts or in terms of legal agreements or property rights across multiple jurisdictions and payroll.
Well,
it
will be just more harsh. We are actually expecting any moment now that FATF, Financial Anti-Task Force, will bring new regulations on anti-money laundering and counterfeiting terrorism. We are having 50 AML direction on EU level, which will completely change anonymity in crypto world, because everyone will have to, all transactions above 50 euros will have to be reported. And I know that status is not holding private key, but I expect that even this regulation will change, because when the centralized exchanges will start losing users due to the fact of new regulations, which demands all of them to do like very harsh due diligence on people. That means that people will practically move to status and similar applications. And if the traffic grows like significantly, and that we have high transactions of Ether flowing for status app, that means that authorities will definitely have magnifier over our functionalities and features. So this is something that we have to prepare ourselves, even though this is something that is entering into force in 2020. But since we are discussing this like as a principle and some kind of midterm or long-term strategy, we have to find solution that actually, at the same time allows us to open to different communities, but some also to think about to stay inside of legal framework, which it's not up to us. We cannot influence it. Regulations will be placed and enter into force, and we can choose how to deal with it. And because it is happening.
I'd like to say something about that. I mean, essentially, it's an attempt to protect the monopoly position through regulation, through the force of the state. Doesn't mean that people are going to have to or will need to do that inside of, if they're staying inside of crypto networks, because they're basically unregulated. So I've said pretty much for about 6 or 7 years now that Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies can only be regulated at the edges of the network where they interface with legacy systems. I'd like to point out, I'm going to post into the chat now a link to Materium, and I'll put it in the notes as well, which is essentially twofold: an attempt to deal with supply chain arbitration and negotiation, and also to deal with regulation at the edges of the network.
Hey, so on regulation, I actually think status itself as a network and a protocol could be very important in combating poor regulation, and like proof that this could be done already exists, like in the past. Well, you could debate sort of the ethics of Uber as a company, but for example, when they were coming up in different cities, and like taxi cabs in different cities, some of them are very like unionized and are very influential with politicians. But like in the U.S., for example, when there was like a last minute vote, they tried to get into some bill to basically ban Uber in like Washington, D.C., for example. And Uber basically just texted all its customers in DC and said, call your politician right now and tell them not to vote against this, to vote down this bill. And the bill didn't pass, even though they tried to slip it in at the last moment. So the thing is, we're like a messaging platform. We do have the power to potentially amplify people that go up against or try to bring bad regulation to get that regulation not passed. And I also heard, like, for example, in South Korea, part of the reason why crypto is taking off there particularly, maybe someone can confirm if this is true or not, is that politicians that step up against or propose regulation against crypto are just voted out of office.
Just a brief anecdote, because it's relevant here. So a few years ago, they had this VAT-MOS kind of regulation in EU, which was a terrible thing in terms of compliance for lots of small businesses. And I personally have at least 2 friends who own sort of a successful small businesses, and they live kind of a nomad lifestyle, and they just moved their business from EU to more sort of economically free regions that don't have the same kind of insane regulatory requirements. And now they're in Singapore, and obviously that means that taxes go there. So I think it's also a matter of, like, if you have these states that continue to push regulation, maybe the future will happen elsewhere, and maybe that's sort of where the opportunity lies in terms of new markets and so on, where you don't have this kind of crazy bureaucracy that's sort of stopping people from interacting and so on.
Yeah, so jurisdictional arbitrage is a really, really interesting topic. And so we were talking also about the DAO and where it's going to be and what it's going to be. And this could possibly be a use case for that, is that we have specific entities and specific jurisdictions that we rely on for their regulatory framework for some of the things that we want to do, that we can then call back on through international law. I
think Sonia is raising her hand, by the way.
Yeah,
so
I just wanted to add to the fact, that change of jurisdiction will not solve problem on EU level, because all new EU directives, including GDPR and copyright directive, will have extraterritorial scope. That means that even though your application is registered outside of EU, just the fact that your users are EU based, that means that you have to comply with it. And we cannot guarantee that we will have 0 EU users. So, it will not save us. This is just a comment, nothing else. Unfortunately,
so
I really don't like EU.
That we go jurisdictionless. That's the point of the DAO, is that there is no jurisdiction for it. It's outside of, it's extra jurisdictional potentially.
Yes, well, this is the ideology of DAO, but I also, for instance, in example of Liberland, which also wants to do ICO outside of any jurisdiction, that means still that authorities want to punish the leaders. That means CEOs can be the one who can be targeted in such movements, because definitely you cannot erase the trace of pre-existence of companies and entities. And if status is status, if it's some kind of like legal inheritance, turned into some kind of structure which is abstract from the regulatory point of view, and more like experimental type, that means that we still have people who can be in charge on company, which was before.
So there were at plausible deniability, which Ricardo had raised.
Those are like worst case scenarios. I'm not talking about like from the this is it like that, but maybe just as a lawyer that I have this mindset that just imagining right away what could be the worst thing that can happen, and then talking just from this. What are the chances that things go in such direction? Like, I don't know if I can give any percentage. But just to have in mind, if you have to make some kind of risk analysis and put it on the paper, like what can go wrong and who can be blamed and what can be potential fine and why and on what basis. So just, collecting what is going on at the moment.
Sonia, I have a question about this. Do you know who is backing this regulation, or who are the interested parties in getting this regulation pushed through in the EU, other than the regulators? I feel like someone must be asking the regulators to put this through.
Well, I don't know who are the stakeholders behind it. It's not somehow public, really. there is I don't know, I'm not following the political agenda of European Parliament. I know definitely there are some of them from Estonia and from Finland who are pushing crypto, and there are, you know, quite like consensus has a contract directly with EU to explore the world of blockchain, but at the same time, of course, they want to control it, and this is mostly because of the money laundering. So it's not about some kind of technology. They're mostly afraid that there's some, you know, of course, it's some kind of a dark web beginning of Bitcoin, and they're catching on this. Like, we all know what cash and dollar can do, and we don't, you know, but they're blaming now crypto and that it's used, you know, even though they have like no proofs that any kind of terrorism was ever financed by cryptocurrency businesses.
So Yeshin was just last night was in Vienna for the European Blockchain Conference.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of a shame that he's not online with us today, but maybe he can talk with us in Prague about that stuff, what it is that he found out. So we're 2 minutes from the top of the hour. Let's take a break and come back at 10 minutes after 2. Is that okay with everybody?
So I think after this, we're not coming back, because after this there will be in status and honestly. So do people have any questions on that? How it will work?
Carrie had asked about.
I read somewhere that we're going to be live streaming the feed. Is that right?
Correct. Yes. So that will be the only person on this call. Yeah.
Okay.
Moot is already starting, and then there won't be any talking. There will just be sort of this stream live. And then people can join either with sort of the common Moot user or just register a new account and just continue the conversation in Anon chat.
Right, cool. So then we should end this recording.